Hey everybody, and welcome to another Chairman of the Board ranking video. This is where I take a look at the last 5 new to me board games that I've played, and I rank and review them in order of preference. But before I get started on today's 5 games, I want to give a shout out to the show's sponsor, keyender.co.uk, who are my go-to online retailer, and if you use the link in the show notes or the QR code, then you can get 5% off your first order. At number 5, I have Medieval Academy. This is a closed drafting and track climbing hybrid, and that's definitely tailored to more of a gateway introductory audience. Straightforward stuff here. You are passing and drafting cards that will allow you to climb tracks at different rates. The tracks score in different ways, so there's like an end of round scoring one, there's an end game scoring track, as well as ones that will score you negative points at the end of the round or negative points at the end of the game. And you're constantly trying to, go back and forth with the other players and who's in the front or who's behind on these tracks. There is an additional touch or an additional couple of tracks. Number one is there's one that will let you boost up the other ones of your choice to give you some kind of passive income, if you want to put it that way. And you've also got one that will just simply score you pure points if you reach certain checkpoints or thresholds on that relevant track. That's pretty much the gist of the game. There isn't really anything hidden here or any hidden depth or layers, but it is a great tool to introduce some very common and repeated board game mechanisms to first time gamers. Definitely younger children are going to understand this, and it's going to be a nice way to drip feed them some of those mechanisms. But that being said, you can still try and try and milk every point you can out of this game. Even if you are a more seasoned gamer, you can try and understand what your opponents are going for, prevent them from getting certain cards, and so on. So it's all very straightforward stuff. I think maybe if you're watching this channel, it might be a little bit too primitive for you, because there are so many other great so many great closed drafting games out there. This one, again, it does what it's supposed to do. It doesn't shy away from saying that it is a gateway game, and I think it stays in its lane in that respect. So it's nothing negative at all about it. It's just one that's not really for me because it's just too straightforward. So that is Medieval Academy at number 5. At number 4, I have AM Jailbreak. So this is one of Sashi's newest games, and it's a card shedding game. That's definitely 90% DNA shared with other card shedding games, where you're trying to get rid of cards as quickly as you can from your hand. But in this one, you are, much like other games, trying to play the same sets of cards or runs of cards. But the strength of those sets or runs isn't actually relevant. It's more of the quantity of cards in those runs or sets. So basically, you are going to have to play an amount of cards equal to one more or one fewer cards than the previous played set. So say somebody played, 4 twos, the next chance I could play a run of 5 cards, or a run of 4 cards, or a run of 3 cards. And as long as it's in that 1 card leeway as in relation to the previous played cards. But there is a slight little trick on the game, a little twist on the game, where you can actually boost the previously played display of cards that someone else played, which will, of course, almost shift the goalposts, meaning that you can now play more cards than you would have been able to do. And the way you do that is you simply just tag on a card from your hand, as long as it follows the relevant pattern as the previous played set. So for example, if the previous player played, as I said, 4 twos, and I had a 2 on my card, I could play a card onto their set to make it 5 twos, and then I could play 6 cards in my turn. So again, it's all about trying to milk those cards in your hand, trying to get rid of them as quickly as you can. I believe at the end of each turn anyway, you're always forced to draw up a card, so you can fill in those gaps and try to make bigger runs. And you can do that by drawing from face down, top decking, or from a central display. And that's pretty much what this game is. You want to be getting rid of your cards. If somebody, or I think it's if 2 or more players break out of jail, as in shed their cards, then everybody else will score points equal to the number of cards in their hand, which is a bad thing in this game. So you want to score you don't want to score points at all, really. And that's what it is. So again, I like card shedding games. This is a good one. I'm not sure if the actual little tag on mechanism is that much of a difference to make it feel, radically different to many other of the card shedding games I have. But I like it. It does what it does what it's supposed to do, and it does what I want it to do. So I think now I've got quite a few of these shedding games in my collection. Thinking of games like Scout, of course, now AM Jailbreak, games like Linko, and others. I probably, long term, I'm probably not going to keep them all. I'll wait and see which ones are starting to rise to the top and ones are hitting the table more than the others before I make that decision of which ones to part with and which ones to keep. But as it stands, I'm liking having the variety, and it's always nice to try new things. So a really good game. It's supposed to do, again, it's a good example of a shedding game. I think maybe that negative one, or one fewer equal or one more card mechanism might confuse people at first, and I've certainly seen that. There's been a few little a little bit of a learning curve. It's not a complex rule, but it's a rule that doesn't feel so organic as some other card shedding games. So it might just take a few turns for people to grok how this one works, but still it's not exactly rocket science, and it's a fun game. So that is 1 AM Jailbreak at number 4. At number 3, I have another Sashi and Sashi game. This is The Great Evening Banquet, which is a new release. I think this was released for the first time at the UK Games Expo, which is where we picked this one up. This is one of those restrictive puzzle style games, but this one is built around this banquet and these banquet tables, and you are drafting these kind of diners and placing them on their dining tables, trying to abide by as many restrictions as you can. So some tables might say, well, you don't want to put a certain colour on this table, or this one might want a certain type of customer, and so on. But at the same time, you are trying to match what's on those tables. You do have these goals in the rows and columns as well, which might, butt heads with the ones on those columns and make it even more restrictive. So you want very particular patrons on very particular tables. But of course, Sashi tries to make it as difficult as possible, because when you're drafting these diners, you're not drafting them alone. They do come in sets, I think varying from 2 up to 4 people at once. So there might be a lot of people where you want 3 of them are perfect for you, but that one is just going to ruin your pattern and cost you some points. Now, the scoring in this game is a little bit funky. Nothing bad, but it just works a little bit different than some other games of this nature. So when you are when you've completed a particular table, you are going to look at who's on it, what colours are on it, and of course the requirement of the table itself. Now you will score points based on who's on it, based on these different sliding scales. Have you got 4 different people? Then there'll be loads of points. Have you got 2 of the same? 2 pairs, and so on. All different points available there. But you only score half the amount of points if you do not complete that table requirement perfectly. So again, that's kind of one of the main sticking points that you want to try and achieve. On the whole, it's a pretty low scoring game anyway, and the game does throw tiles at you thick and fast, so the turns do go by quite rapidly, and of course, the more tiles you're placing, more seats are filled, which means your restrictions are getting tighter and tighter. Now, the kind of base game alone is interesting enough, and it does remind me of some other games that I've covered on the show recently, such as Lost Seas. But what I really like about this game is the option to play the advanced mode, which is when these tables will start to synergize with each other, meaning that a particular seat will actually add towards 2 different requirements at once. Yes, that does increase the complexity and the restrictions even more, but when you pull off those big moves, it makes it that much more satisfying. And it's nice that this game gives you that flexibility to play it at face value or really up the ante and put you under a lot of pressure to play with that advanced mode. So I like games of this nature. If you like games like Cascadia, Calico, Harmonies, the games that put you in a chokehold, put things in the right place, then I'm pretty sure you are going to like the Great Evening Banquet. So that's the Great Evening Banquet at number 3. At number 2, I have Looot with 3 O's. This is kind of an old school feeling Euro puzzly game as you are deploying your little workforce onto this shared board, taking tiles from it and placing them on your own player board. And when you're placing these tiles on your own player area, you are trying to almost fulfill these contracts by surrounding particular requirements with particular tiles. So you start with some on your main board, which might say, well, you want 2 houses surrounding this and 2 watchtowers. And of course, you're trying to populate that main board, not only to get the resources, but also to try and chain things together, because the way you acquire some of these buildings on the main board does vary. So for example, I think with the watchtowers, you want to try and connect them together with an unbroken route of your own meeples. Or the houses will just simply give you, well, you'll get a house if you place next to a house. And you've even got these castles, which are high scoring. And if you build, I think it's a chain of 5 workers connecting to that castle, then you can place the castle on your main board. So not only are you trying to, again, fulfill those initial contracts on your player board by placing things perfectly, as the game progresses, you will have the option to claim these other objectives and place them on your player board, which will have their own requirements based on the resources. So some might say, well, you want 2 trees and 2 sheep touching this particular tile. If you do that, you will flip it over, and that will increase the yield of points you get from other features on your player board. So for example, it might say, well, now your castles are worth 4 points more, which is obviously a great thing to do if you focused on claiming castles. The interaction in this game is pretty interesting because you can always deploy your meeples next to where anybody else has deployed. And based on the fact that you do have these powers that will let you break normal rules by being able to spawn anywhere on the map or getting double yield of resources, sometimes you might want to piggyback off other players' efforts. The turn act is good in this one because although initially the display of resources looks rich in terms of the quantity, they do very quickly get grabbed up, and you'll find that certain areas of the board are quite dry on certain resources, meaning that you might want to use your power token to teleport into a different region of the board, but the other players are going to start gobbling up all the tiles around that. So again, it's all about trying to try and act quickly before your opponents might grab what you want. But of course, you are fighting so many other things at once by trying to connect things together and so on. So I was really impressed with how clean this game is. I also like the tempo of the game because you do have a pretty limited amount of workers which dictate your turns in the game. I think it's only like 13 turns or so, meaning that you have to make each turn count. And it's one of those games where you're always trying to place things optimally on your player board so that a certain resource token can contribute towards several objectives at once. But unavoidably, you're going to start placing things and then change your game plan and then kind of rue the mistakes you've made earlier and wish you did things differently. Still, it's a very well thought out game, nice and smooth, nice and fast. I think everything's nice and clear. And it's kind of the style of game that I like, really. So, and very puzzly in its nature, but that mixed with the tension of grabbing what you need does come through nicely. So that is Looot at number 2. And finally, at number 1, I have Overparked. So this is a kind of a drafting, spatial puzzle, tile placement style game as you are trying to chain as many of these same vehicles together by connecting them on your really congested player board. Now, the way you place things on your board is through this card drafting system that is pretty much a carbon copy of a really good polyomino game called Planet Unknown, where when you choose your particular card that you want, everybody else will get theirs at the same time based on what you've chosen. And I really like that degree of simultaneous play to keep things moving and to keep players engaged. Now, once you've taken your card, you're going to take those relevant vehicles from the supply, place them on your player board, again with the aim of trying to chain things together. But there are lots of things you need to consider because not only are there variable objectives which you're trying to race towards, which might say, if you get the outer edge of your player board done first, you'll get X amount of points, or if you fill this region in first, you'll get X amount of points. Stuff we've seen before, but what's different about this game is that not only are all of these shapes not technically polyominoes, they're all just straight rectangles or squares. You can actually move them later based on other restrictions. So basically, when you do certain actions or draft certain cards, you get these key symbols, and then these key symbols will allow you to drive the cars in a straight line into an empty space. So you have like this slide puzzle thing going on at the same time, which I think is a really cool touch. And I'm surprised it's not been done before. And of course, with that mixed with the the Overparked, the crowded car park theme or skin of the game, it just works wonderfully. I like the potential to string things together, because you do have the option to take these little moped markers, which are just pure squares, and they will actually act as a kind of like a junction to chain many things together, because they're wild, and those can be used as wild for several different routes at once, which I think is a really nice touch and gives you that potential to make really powerful bonuses. Additionally, there are other kind of punishments you need to be careful of, because if you can never not place a particular vehicle, then it'll go in this kind of overspill car park, which will score you negative points at the end of the game. There are ways to get that back on the board, but you need to consider what you're going for to get that. And also there's these like traffic cones on the board as well, which you want to try and avoid touching, which is almost impossible to do so. So, this game has a lot of competition on the market. There are so many polyomino, spatial puzzle style games, but I actually loved this one because of not only the drafting system, which I think is great and was done perfectly in Planet Unknown, but I love the idea of the potential to slide things along by spending these little key tokens. You can move this one, which let you move this one, which might let you do even bigger routes and get things out of the way that you didn't want there. So you have that little bit of mitigation, but the mitigation comes at a cost, and you want to make sure that you use those tokens very, very wisely. And I just generally like the overall feel of the chaotic nature of this game, because it does really pack in to that car park, and you can't really have much maneuverability as the game goes on. And I think it just hit the sweet spot for me with what I want with one of these style games. And hopefully this one can gain some traction. I don't think it's the easiest game to get a hold of, but I think if you have played several of these games, just trying to figure out which one's the best one for you to keep, I would say give Overparked a look, because I think this one might be one of the best ones that I've ever played. So that is Overparked, very well deserved, number 1. So there we have it, that concludes the video. Hopefully you have enjoyed it and discovered a game or two. If you have, please be sure to hit like and subscribe to the channel, and check out my other content too. But for everybody else, I'll see you next time on Chairman of the Board. Bye bye.